Hi, I'm Douglas Ferguson. Welcome to the Facilitation Lab podcast, where I speak with Voltage Control certification alumni and other facilitation experts about the remarkable impact they're making. We embrace a method-agnostic approach so you can enjoy a wide range of topics and perspectives as we examine all the nuances of enabling meaningful group experiences. This series is dedicated to helping you navigate the realities of facilitating collaboration, ensuring every session you lead becomes truly transformative. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to join us for a live session sometime, you can join our Facilitation Lab community. It's an ideal space to apply what you learn in the podcast in real time with peers. Sign up today at voltagecontrol.com/facilitation-lab. And if you'd like to learn more about our 12-week facilitation certification program, you can read about it at voltagecontrol.com. Today, I'm with Erin Warner, founder of Head Plus Heart Coaching and Facilitation. She's on a mission to help leaders connect courageously, communicate clearly, and collaborate with creativity. She is also a partner at Exec Consulting, where she facilitates trainings on leadership, emotional intelligence, trust, and teamwork. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thanks, Douglas. It's great to be here.
It's so great to have you. Well, let's get started here with some early on experiences that you went through. And I know that early on at Exec Consulting, you and Mauricio were delivering tried and true content for leadership trainings that folks might be very familiar with. And you began to notice some subtle surges of energy during partner shares and reflection. What were the specific patterns in those rooms that told you facilitation was calling you toward a different way of working?
Yeah, exactly. We were doing a series of workshops that were very well received. People really liked them. And I had the privilege to see them over and over again because of that. And I noticed that the little bit of interaction that we had built into it were moments of like particularly high energy in the room and actually delight and pleasure of the participants and learning from each other in that moment instead of just simply learning from us. So I got curious about that. And I started to bring in little bits of other interactive moments and saw that that held true. People loved it. They got a lot out of it. And so I just got curious about how can I find ways to up-level our workshops with intentionality by leveraging this pattern that I've observed. And I had a feeling that there was a whole world out there that I didn't really know about, and I set out to find it. And that's how I found facilitation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to hear more about this learning from each other. Like, how was that first showing up for you?
Yeah, so the most basic form of interaction that we had in our original format was when we asked people first to take solo time to reflect on their aha moments and takeaways from what we had taught them. So that was the first step, solo reflection time. And then we had them pair up and just simply share their aha moments and takeaways with each other. But that's what I mean by then they were learning from each other in that moment, because it's either reinforcing something that they also thought was interesting or maybe bringing something back up that had kind of slipped through and not registered with them. And they're like, oh yeah, that was interesting. And so maybe they would bring in their own work context and explain why it was interesting or relevant to them.
Yeah, it's always fascinating too when folks are able to connect to something a little bit deeper inside themselves, because then they're relating to the material in ways that are difficult when you're just passively just soaking information in.
Yeah, and so relating to material, I'm really excited about the first intuition I had to bring that into our training. There's something we teach called the flow channel, which many people might have heard of. It's that flow is when you're so engaged in an activity that you lose track of time, you forget about your surroundings, and you're just like fully present with the activity or the challenge. And so we teach about that. And we also teach that managers have the power to like bring people into flow by balancing challenge and support with intention. Because if you have too much challenge, you get into anxiety. And if you have too little challenge, you get into boredom. And we used to just simply teach that to them. But then we brought them an activity as I was exploring this world of like, how do we make it more interactive? And they get to actually wrestle with the information instead of passively receiving it. So we had them draw just like an X and Y axis, a little graph, and then a diagonal line from the lower left to the upper right. And then that represented the flow channel. and then literally like plot themselves and their colleagues as little dots on the graph, either above the flow channel in anxiety or below the flow channel in boredom, and just like start to like have real awareness of what this means in their real life, not just as an abstract concept, but, oh, wow, look, my colleague is in anxiety, and like, how can we bring them back into flow? And so that became a really like a favorite of our participants.
Yeah, it's really, they can connect to it in a more meaningful way. It becomes an assessment versus just a piece of information.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that used too for leaders to think about managing and mentoring their team, because the idea of helping ensure that you're assigning tasks and work when you're delegating, you're doing that in a way that is keeping them in that flow state.
Yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive. We come across some managers who are afraid to give people too much challenge, but humans actually, the flow channel actually isn't where challenge and skill are perfectly matched. It's actually where challenge exceeds skill just by a little bit, just enough to make it fun and to make you feel like you accomplished something when you did it. And you can look at video game design. Like once you complete a level, what's your reward? It's a harder level. It's not an easier one. Nobody would play that game. Like we actually crave challenge as long as it doesn't put us into that stress and anxiety zone. And so it's really liberating for managers to learn that and know like, oh, wow, actually I can challenge my people and that's going to bring out the best in them.
And it's such a fun reframe too, because oftentimes I think managers are looking at the symptoms, and this is a great way of stepping back and looking at what's really at play here. Are they really disengaged, or is it that I haven't given them enough a challenge, or have I over-challenged them?
Yeah. And it invites them to be curious about the whole person. Like maybe they're challenged, but it's not things at work, but maybe things are going on in their life. Maybe they have a sick relative, and just being curious about what challenges, though, are factoring into how they're showing up and how we can support that.
Yeah, absolutely. In your alumni story, you described the Piedmont sessions as a mirror for your practice, where you could literally see when the room leaned in or leaned back. And I'm curious, can you take us to a moment where you realized you needed to redesign the experience, not just the agenda?
I would say that we like to over deliver. Like we really want to give so much information and content, but I think we know as facilitators and learners ourselves that there's a certain point where it's too much. The brain can't take in any more in a day. And so seeing that fatigue set in when we, out of goodwill, we're just giving so much, but mid-afternoon people are just not receiving it anymore, then we can still provide value without providing more info and content, but actually providing space for them to integrate and reflect and connect with the content that we've already provided. So it's not about quantity at that point, but it's about quality.
When you're working with clients like that and diving in the content and helping them, find tools, integrate, go deeper on stuff, how often are you coming back and coaching later on? I'm always curious about the relationships that folks have with their clients when they're working in a facilitative manner. Some folks tend to spend more time coaching, and there's a little bit of group work that feels more facilitated. And then there are others who do nothing but the group work and they don't do any coaching. I'm kind of curious where your blend is there.
Yeah, I don't know how to quantify the blend. It's a mix, and it depends on the context. We do now, in the version of the workshops that we have evolved into, hold a lot of space for group coaching in the moment. So the things that emerge, and if we see like a consensus in the room, like, yeah, I have that problem too, then we pause. We don't give any more content. Like we just have a group coaching moment, 10 minutes maybe, right there, because that's what's alive for them. That's what they're asking for.
And what about after the session? Does it typically transition into some one-on-one coaching work after the session, or some of these sessions just purely a group education and you're done with that team?
Yeah, I'd say that the majority of them don't engage with us for further coaching, and that's just the experience that they get in the room. Of course, sometimes that does happen. We go deeper, we get brought in-house. And I will say when we do, not in this Piedmont series that we're talking about, but when we are already in-house and we're doing a workshop training for a company, very often we have what we call a follow-up program where we follow them for like 2 months after the fact to give them accountability, support, and coaching around applying whatever it was that they learned that day.
Yeah, I found that accountability can really help ensure the stickiness of kind of what's been learned in the more kind of dynamic group session.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very challenging to then go back to the demands and the pace of your normal workday and then try to apply new behaviors and shift things. Like we tend to go back to our default, and that's human. And so we do try to support people by giving them the structure and accountability and the feedback and the coaching and all that.
And I recall you also talked a lot about early formative experience that shaped your instincts as a facilitator before you even knew the word facilitation.
Yeah. So looking back, I really felt well when I was in a container of an excellent facilitator. Looking back, I can name it. At the time, I had no idea. A big example for me is Girl Scout camp. I absolutely adored Girl Scout camp. And I was kind of a shy, introverted girl, and going to a camp, actually, it wasn't with people I knew. Like these are all new girls, and they're all strangers at the beginning and dear friends at the end. And how was that possible for me to have a positive experience? It's because of the counselors and the leaders who really facilitated a strong sense of belonging and connection. And the way they did that was things that we might see in pop culture about camps, but there were things like songs that each little group had their own song. So you had a feeling of belonging and identity, or simple things about like how we gathered for our meals, or even how we lined up and walked from like our tents to the dining hall, or we would like raise and lower the flag every morning and evening, and these like rituals marking the beats throughout the day. And it was really excellently facilitated. And I think it allowed me to thrive and feel welcome and safe and included. And I think that's one of the things I love about facilitation.
Rituals can be so soothing. This idea that we know what to do. We don't have to have anxiety around what's next, or am I fitting in right, or am I doing the right thing, or do I look funny? It's like, no, I have a purpose to be here. And so I think they can provide nice structures to kind of lean on.
Yeah, I really relate to that. I feel structure for me does make me feel safe and guided. And then you can flow within that, then you can explore and be free, but you're held in that structure. And I think that's a really good feeling.
Yeah, it's different just going to the gym and picking up some weights and throwing them around versus having a program, or even having a coach, or even being part of a class. It's just a totally different feeling and experience, right? You might be way more self-conscious just walking into a gym and heading over to the free weights and doing whatever, unless you've got a lot of experience. But if you go to a class and the instructor's giving you some really specific instructions and moves and exercises, it feels way different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes me think about my life. I moved a lot as a child to different schools in different states. And luckily, I played sports. And that's how I was able to make friends quickly, because I knew how we were going to interact. We're going to get on the field. We're going to hit the ball around. Meanwhile, we're chatting. We're getting to know each other. We're joking. We're becoming friends. But that structure, I think, made it really easier and more accessible for me to connect with people quickly when I was the new person in a new place, in a new school.
Yeah. And when we're invited to be parts of different new teams or new programs, or invited to work in new ways. And this comes up all the time, because innovation is constantly shifting just the status quo, or what normal is, right? We didn't have all these AI tools 5 years ago, and yet now they're commonplace. So it's changed the landscape on how we work, and having rituals surrounding that and underneath it helps us come together in a way that's more knowable and more calming.
Yeah, and that makes me think of one team that I'm working with. They're growing, so they've brought a lot of people on board in the past year, and the onboarding moment is so crucial, and there's so much opportunity there to really let them know the culture and give them some structure of like, this is how we do things. Now you can flow within that, be yourself, but like it gives them something to work with that I think is healthy for the collective and also for that individual. And it's just such an important moment that with the client that I work with, we've been iterating on to really, really capitalize on that moment.
And how did studying civil rights at Reed's College impact this? Like, were there formative moments there as well?
I studied civil rights because fairness is a value of mine. And anything that has to do with racial inequality or discrimination, like on a very basic level, just has always struck me as unfair, like nonsensical, really. But I'll call it unfair because that's like how it registers in my value system. For instance, in 2020, I found voltage control because I was looking for ways to develop my facilitation skills for my work. And at that time, there was a lot of racial upheaval in the US. And one of the first activities that I participated in was a remote gathering where a facilitator gave us space and processes to reflect on and share how we were feeling about what was going on in the country. And this really meant a lot to me because, again, it was very helpful to have some structure around that, because otherwise, because I really care about these things and emotions were high, I could range from feeling overwhelmed and like highly activated to like just shut down and disconnected. And with a really skilled facilitator who gathered us that day online, it helped me have some clarity and moving the feelings through and sharing them with other people and feeling not alone. And I just had looked for facilitation because I wanted to make my work, my corporate work, stronger. I didn't know it could also like offer these things that were so related to my deeply held values. And discovering that was really amazing, because then I was even more excited about facilitation. Like I feel like it truly can be something for civic engagement.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that you had planned to lurk quietly at that first Facilitation Lab. And so bring me back to, Erin showing up, assuming that you were going to just kind of lurk and be quiet and soak it in. How did that unfold for you? How did you get sucked in?
Yeah, so I just showed up with curiosity, wanting to observe, which was pretty common in those days. I was on a lot of calls where passively observing, and the facilitator gave us a really deep prompt, which was, when was the last time that you cried? And then he put us into breakout rooms of 2 people. So there I was, one-on-one with somebody. I had my camera off. And of course, I'm always at choice. No one had a gun to my head. No one forced me to do it. But I did decide, like, hey, I'm here with this person. I've been given this really human question, and I'm going to turn on my camera. And we proceeded to have a conversation that I do remember to this day, because he vulnerably shared crying recently, more out of joy because he had just finished a big milestone in his life, and that was beautiful. And I was actually in a moment of my life that was not easy. I was feeling really down in that period. And so just being able to share, like, not a specific cry, but crying or feeling like crying was a feeling I was living with. And just being able to be witnessed in that. He didn't try to fix it or anything, but it was a beautiful moment, and so unexpected that that kind of connection could happen across space and time and screens.
How did that unexpected intimacy shift your sense of what a gathering can do?
It really raised my ambitions, to be honest, in a good way. It showed me that the limits were my imagination and my courage to make bold invitations. Like, that was a bold invitation to ask us to reflect and share when was the last time we cried. And it has to be handled delicately. And I'm glad that I've invested in this skill and that you train people in this skill. But with the right care and craft, so much is possible, so much depth and healing and connection and delight and wonder. And so, yeah, the lesson I took from that is that really anything is possible. with the intention and courage to pursue it.
And as you got deeper into facilitation, so, it's 2020, you're attending these sessions, you're kind of going deeper, you're experimenting more. What would you say was the first idea that you tested with your participants, and kind of what changed for them as you started to make some of these experiments?
I think as I started to make experiments with facilitation, what changed for my participants was their own sense of empowerment. Because with great facilitation, you really are empowering the people in the room to generate their own experience, their own collective wisdom, their own decisions. And I think that is refreshing for them and energizing and motivating. And so I'd say that's probably one of the biggest gifts that I've been able to offer now that I lean more on facilitation, is the empowerment of the participants.
Do you recall a specific story? Does anything come to mind when you noticed this empowerment? And what was the facilitation move that really unlocked that?
I was working with a group that was not connecting as a team. And we were literally trying to do team building and help them feel and function as a team instead of a group of solo practitioners, individuals. And I think it was really important that we facilitated them through what that meant to them and what that would look like, what would make them feel like part of a team. So we used some of my favorite activities. We used TRIZ, which I think goes by some other names sometimes, like inverse thinking or opposite thinking. But TRIZ is basically where you say, if you wanted to have the most dysfunctional team ever, where no one trusts each other and everyone's at cross purposes, like what activities would you do? And we have them brainstorm and share. And then we kind of turn the tables on them and say, okay, which one of these activities are you currently doing? And to create safety, I let them keep that anonymous. I didn't ask them to share it with everyone. They weren't outing themselves, but just like be honest with yourself. Which one of these are you doing? And then giving them not a to-do list, but a not to-do list. So like, I'm not going to give you any extra work, but I'm going to ask you to just stop doing one of those things that you identified that's counter to building a team. And so I think that was a moment where they felt like, hey, we are responsible for creating our own reality of whether we function as a team or not. And here's some insight and awareness around that. And now here's an action that I can take. But I didn't tell them what to do. They told themselves what to do.
TRIZ is fantastic. And, I think the biggest challenge with TRIZ is getting folks to follow that rule of not identifying new things to do, but identifying things to stop. Like everyone always wants to say, oh, well, they'll turn the stopping thing into a doing thing. And if we can really hold people to that notion or that rule, that ritual of identifying the thing we're going to stop doing, that's really powerful because it creates room for other things we've been wanting to do.
Yeah, it is really powerful. And that's one where I have the privilege to work with some of the people in that group individually. And so be able to follow up with them after, like, how is it going? Are you able to, sometimes these things are habits. You're not even conscious you're doing them. So stopping isn't always easy. So checking in, were you able to break that habit, shift that, make a different choice in that moment?
I've even seen participants, they get really clever, they use like double negatives. So it sounds like, we need to stop not having annual report. It's like, hey, you're just saying we need to start making an annual report. What are we doing that's getting in our way? Let's identify those things and stop them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm on to you.
Yeah. They have the little tricks, of course.
They do, because it's hard. And like, I get that. It's hard to look in the mirror, take responsibility, and accept that there's things that we're doing that are productive and there's other things that are counterproductive. And like, let's let those go. But it's not easy. Yeah. There's a reason. I also tried to share with them in this particular case, like empathy and understanding. I know there's a reason you're doing these things. You're not doing them to sabotage the team. They're serving some function.
Or they served a function in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But if they're still serving a function, okay, it's going to be hard to stop doing it until we get to the root cause then and like address that in a different way or resolve it so that you
Yeah.
don't feel the need to do that anymore.
Sometimes people feel the need to do the things because of coming back to that word we were talking about earlier, ritual. If it's become customary or ritualistic, and I think these activities can be powerful to connect back to the purpose and why are we doing these things? And if we're doing things that are counterproductive to what we're wanting to accomplish, and we can't really attach to any real meaningful why, and it's just for historic purposes, then, we should probably get rid of those things.
Yeah, in this particular case, what we identified, many of the counterproductive behaviors were stemming from trust or lack of trust. So either like maybe micromanaging because I don't trust that person's going to follow through, or maybe like double checking because I don't trust that person's got my back. So a lot of it came down to trust was producing counterproductive behaviors that once that was addressed, which is no simple feat, would help them function better as a team.
I'm also remembering that you were given some coaching advice, don't conform, that was powerful in reflection because you said it gave you permission to bring your full self to the work. And I'm curious, can you share a moment when you felt the pull to fit a mold and instead chose authenticity?
Yeah, well, I want to share that advice came from Eric when I was in the voltage control certification, because I had noticed a pattern in myself of once I like train and learn the way things are done, then I feel pressure that I put on myself to conform. And then that drains me of the enthusiasm that I initially had and my unique contribution that I might be able to make. And I mentioned this pattern that I was trying to shift and resist. And Eric really gave me the greatest gift of saying to me, your unique perspective is an asset. It is your contribution, and it will attract people to you who resonate with that. So don't conform. And it was really meaningful to me. He gave me that advice. And one time that came into play was actually when I had been invited to facilitate a session at the Voltage Control Summit, which was a really exciting opportunity for me and one of the bigger stages I had ever been on. And I felt a lot of enthusiasm at first. I was like, this is great. And then I started to feel resistance and procrastination. And I'm glad that I was able to identify it was because I was starting to feel like it was a performance and I needed to show up the way I thought a capital F facilitator would show up and not as me. And then I remembered like, these people know me well. They know who I am. They know my vibe. And if they ask me to do this, it's because they want me to do it, not me pretending to be someone else. But I was able to make that connection because of that amazing advice Eric had given me a couple years prior. And it continues to be something I reinforce to myself regularly.
I love that. It's like reassuring to tap into who we are and let that shine.
Yeah, I always tell myself I'll be an infinitely better version of myself than I ever will be of anybody else. Like, just be my best self. Don't be my best imitation of somebody else.
That reminds me, one thing that's unique about you and your approach is how you've woven fitness into your work and how that's a hallmark of how you think about facilitation and how that shows up for you. So I'd be curious to know more about that. I'm sure the listeners would be interested to hear how you kind of weave that into your style.
Yeah, I really believe there's a lot of wisdom in the body and also a lot of energy and pleasure. And so I think it's great to bring those things online. That's exactly what I brought to the summit. I led a session on embodied decision making. And I have a background as I used to be a lawyer. And I love decision making. I think it's really powerful and one of the greatest outcomes we can bring if facilitation, if that's what's been requested. And so I wanted to bring those two things together. And what does our body tell us when we're sensing into a decision? And so giving people opportunity to actually feel how they feel about a decision gives them information. Like, do I feel comfortable with this? Do I feel torn? Like, that's a metaphor, kind of for your body being split. So one thing I particularly like is if you have a few options to set up stations in the room where those options are being represented. And you can mingle and look around, walk through the room, walk through the space to evaluate them. And then when it's time to vote, to literally go walk and stand in that space. And in this experience, little by little got narrowed down to 2. And maybe your top choice is no longer available and there's only 2 choices left. And you have to walk to one of the 2 options that's left. There's a lot of information for you and for the facilitator in your walking. Like, am I walking with hesitation or with enthusiasm? Am I literally dragging my feet? Am I feeling like I don't want to walk over there? And I think that that's the wisdom in the body versus just checking a box on a ballot, for example. So I love to bring in the wisdom of even like it could be standing up or sitting down to represent your point of view, or walking closer or further to a certain point to represent more like your temperature on that decision.
Yeah, it's kind of about tuning in. And it's making me think about your 3D wellness concept.
Yeah, so I do have a background also as a fitness teacher. And I was teaching on Zoom during the era when we were all online during the pandemic. And I had a big aha moment when at the end of my classes that I would do every week on Zoom, people would stay and chat and laugh and joke around and commiserate for a long time, like 30 minutes minimum. And then I might close the room at that point, but people were loving it. And so I realized that people were coming for the fitness, but they were staying for the connection. And I realized that what I was offering them was not only physical wellness, but also emotional wellness, like within themselves as an individual, and social wellness, like within the collective. And so I named that 3D wellness, and that's something that I try to offer in all of my experiences.
So as your clients begin to experience the impact of this work, and you bring on more facilitation and execs offerings, how are you aligning with long-term clients who expect content for delivery so they can embrace a more participatory, co-created way of working?
Honestly, it's not feeling like a very hard sell right now. I find that people are actually hungry for this. They're hungry to participate and be asked like to contribute. I mean, we do live in a time where there's no shortage of information. And if we're gathering in person and making that effort, it's starting to be, I feel like, in the zeitgeist that people feel like it's a waste of time to do something I could do on YouTube or research myself. And so we're building on the abundance of information that's available. We will refresh it and we will bring, some teaching always to anchor what we're going to be focusing on. But our clients are really on board with getting to roll up their sleeves and play with it and apply it. And like everyone wants results. So they want to know, like, what is this going to do for me? What's the point? And like, that's what facilitation is. Like they get to like immediately use it and see how it's going to benefit their company, their culture, their customers, and just their day to day.
We've talked a bit about how you are ready to and have stepped into moments of leadership for corporate rooms and intimate circles alike. And I'm curious what signals tell you a team is genuinely ready to do the self-awareness and shared responsibility work this approach requires.
So when we're scoping an engagement and making the plans with the leader who's bringing us in-house, we really want to be of service in a practical way. And so we lead with that. This is not just like a nice to know, like I read the book and now I'm done. Like we are very results oriented. And I think leaders like to hear that, but they also want to know, but how is that going to happen? And so then we can explain to them about facilitation, that we will bring in some content that's going to anchor our focus. Everyone knows that this is the topic today. And then we are going to actually I like to make the word responsible into a verb, like we're going to responsibilize the people in the room for their own up-leveling and their own professional development, because they're adults and they're going to learn better too if they feel autonomous and empowered and responsible. And so I think that's how we get leaders on board with the style of learning that we're offering, that's interactive and participatory. And I think they want to hear that it's not just going to be silly games and icebreakers, but it's going to be like actually like really deep and potentially rigorous for an outcome that shows results. Because that's the name of the game, I think, for the leaders. And then in the room, we kind of give a recap of that and say, hey, we are going to talk about this topic today, and then we're going to put it back in your lap, in your hands, to generate the connections and the ahas and the takeaways and the action items and how you're going to apply it. We're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to help you discover what makes sense for you to choose, to commit to, and then to help you have accountability and support around doing that.
We haven't talked about Head Plus Heart much, so I'm curious to learn more about the vision there and what experiments you're excited to run in the next year to test that vision.
In my personal life, I've been on what I call a self-love journey, where I really learned a lot of things about myself and healed some things and like reframed some self-limiting beliefs that I had. And it really changed my life. And I'm so grateful that I did that. And so now what's really meaningful to me in this chapter is to make a new, more personal offering. It's completely separate from the corporate work that I do. And it's self-love and empowerment experiences, gatherings, and coaching. And I'm a very word-oriented person. And so what I'm offering is actually thinking about words as literal magic spells that we use every day to create our reality. And so harnessing the power of words to create a reality that is more empowering. I mean, my background is in law, and law is a great example of words creating reality. Like you can go to jail or not based on like following the things that are written down in a law book. I mean, they have the coercive power of the state behind them, but that gives them power, and it's just words. Words that we say to ourselves, self-talk, definitely creates our reality. It creates our frame of mind, the decisions that we make, the way we respond to people. That's a big focus of the work that I'm doing now. And in facilitation, the words, the invitations that the facilitator offers is creating an immersive experience that is the reality for the people in that room in that moment. So I'm really excited to be exploring this in partnership with people who want to go on this journey with me. And it's just a very personal offering that I am making in this chapter in my life.
Wonderful. And as we come to a close, I want to invite you to leave our listeners with a final thought.
So my final thought is that words are literal magic spells that create our reality. So use them wisely, especially the ones that you say to yourself. And words are the tools that empower us to connect courageously, communicate clearly, and collaborate creatively.
So great chatting with you, Erin. I look forward to the next time we're able to sit down and talk. And thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, I look forward to that as well. And it was a pleasure to chat with you, Douglas. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Facilitation Lab podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review and be sure to subscribe and receive updates when new episodes are released. We love listener tales and invite you to share your facilitation stories. Send them to us on LinkedIn or via email. If you want to know more, head over to our blog, where I post weekly articles and resources about facilitation, team dynamics, and collaboration. voltagecontrol.com.